all the light in the world. How are you all doing? Today we're going to talk about a topic that a lot of people live with, but almost no one really stops to observe: cats. But not in the usual sense. It's not about behavior. It's not just about living with them. There are some things that happen at home that go unnoticed, and I want to show you a few points that maybe you've never stopped to notice. If you have a cat in your house, there are things happening around you that you haven't noticed yet. And it's not about affection, it's not about companionship, it's not about those things everyone talks about to make everything lighter, prettier, more acceptable. It's something quieter, more constant, and above all, deeper than it seems. There was a time in my life when I didn't like cats. And it wasn't hate, it wasn't trauma, it wasn't anything that extreme. It was just ignorance. That idea they put in our heads since we were kids, that cats are cold, that cats don't care about you, that cats only like the house, that cats are self-interested, that cats don't get attached. And today, looking back, I see how superficial that view is, because no one ever stopped to explain what really happens. And that's what started to bother me. It wasn't behavior, it was energy. I started to notice that there were moments at home that changed without any logical explanation. This didn't just happen once in a while, it was a pattern, out of nowhere. The atmosphere seemed heavy, for no apparent reason, no arguments, no specific problem. Just that strange feeling, as if there was something there. And then, without anyone doing anything, it would just disappear. It disappeared and everything felt lighter. And this started happening more than once, more than twice, more than several times. And there was always one detail that repeated itself along with this. The cat was nearby. At first, like anyone would, I ignored it because we always try to explain everything logically. We try to fit everything into something that makes rational sense. But it got to a point where I couldn't pretend it was just a coincidence anymore. I started to really pay attention without judgment, without trying to fit it into anything, just observing. And that's when things started to become clearer. There was one specific day that I remember very clearly. I was feeling bad, but it wasn't something simple to explain. It wasn't an illness, it wasn't a specific problem, it wasn't a particular situation. It was that feeling like something is draining you, with no clear reason, no direct explanation. And that starts to bother you, it gets heavier, it starts to feel strange. And that day he came, without me calling, without me doing anything, without any kind of stimulus. He simply came closer, touched me, and stayed there, still. And then that sound started. That sound that a lot of people ignore. That sound that many think is just a detail, the purring. And in that moment, I started to notice something. The feeling started to change. And it wasn't psychological, it wasn't emotional, it wasn't like, oh, the animal made me feel better. No, it was a real change. That pressure that was there started to ease. That discomfort started to go away, and I noticed it happening right then, effortlessly, without any logical explanation. And that's when it clicked for me. That wasn't just normal behavior, that was a function. After that, I started to observe much more closely, and the more I watched, the more patterns I noticed. A cat doesn't choose a spot for no reason. A cat doesn't touch you for no reason. A cat doesn't keep insisting without a reason. A cat doesn't start acting strange for no reason. Something is happening there, and it starts to bother you once you realize it, because it breaks that simple idea of it's just an animal. It's not. The cat notices things that you don't. It goes into places you avoid, even without realizing you're avoiding them. It goes to corners of the house that seem normal, but there's something there. It stares at fixed spots for too long, with no apparent reason. And you can try to ignore it, you can laugh about it, you can pretend it's just your imagination, but those who live with them know. You know it's not normal, you know it's not random, you know there's something there. And it's not about fear, it's about perception. It's about starting to understand that there are things happening around you that you don't directly notice. And when you start paying attention to this, you begin to understand the real role of this animal in your home. And that completely changes the way you see it. You stop seeing it as a pet. you stop seeing it as just an animal and start seeing it as an active presence, as something that influences the environment. Now I want to ask you a question and answer honestly. If you have a cat, has it ever stared fixedly at a spot in the house, out of nowhere, for no reason, with nothing there? Has it ever started acting strange without explanation? Has it ever gotten restless at specific moments? Has it ever clung to you when you were feeling down without you calling it? Comment about this because it happens more often than people admit. Much more often. But most people ignore it. Most pretend not to see. Most prefer to treat it as a coincidence. And the problem isn't that it happens. The problem is not understanding it. Because when you don't understand what's happening, you lose control. And when you lose control, you start living within an energy that isn't yours. You start absorbing things you shouldn't. You start carrying weight that isn't yours. And it's exactly at this point that the cat comes in. After that moment, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Because when you notice something happening right in front of you so clearly, there's no way to go back and pretend you didn't see it. And that's when I started to observe more closely, without trying to explain, without trying to fit it into anything, just observing. And the more I observed, the more I realized that it wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern. In a heavy atmosphere, the cat would change. In a light atmosphere, he would relax. But it wasn't just that, because if it were only a reaction, you could still try to explain it simply. But it wasn't just a reaction, it was interference. And this is the point that changes everything, because it's one thing to notice and another thing to act on it. And the cat acts. Some people have already noticed this but never stopped to understand it. When someone is feeling bad, the cat won't leave their side. When someone is nervous, restless, with a busy mind, the cat starts to come closer, to rub against them, to insist. And it's not the usual affection, it's not a light interaction, it's insistence. It's as if the cat is pulling that out of you. And when you start paying attention, you notice that after this, the feeling changes. And this happens more than once, many times over. Now think with me. A house with two people already has an exchange of energy, two different minds, two different thoughts, two different emotional loads. Now imagine increasing that. 3 people, 4, 5, each with their own problems, frustrations, worries, insecurities. And that doesn't go away. It stays. Arguments don't disappear, they linger in the environment. Fatigue doesn't go away, it accumulates. Envy doesn't go away, it remains. And humans don't clear that away. They just keep living, keep accumulating, keep carrying it. And that starts to weigh on you, even if no one consciously notices. And it's exactly at this point that the cat comes in. But there's a detail that almost no one talks about. There's a cost to this because the cat is not infinite. It's not an inexhaustible source. It absorbs, but it also feels the weight of it. And that's when I started to notice something else. Cats that changed their behavior for no apparent reason. Cats that became quieter or more restless. Cats that started to act differently from their usual behavior. And most people look at this and think, oh, it must be the food, oh, it must be age, oh, it must be something physical. And that's not always the case. I started to observe environments with many people and few cats. And it became clear there. It was as if the animal was overwhelmed, as if it was absorbing more than it could process. And this keeps building up like a sponge that is never squeezed. It keeps absorbing until it can't take it anymore. And this starts to show up in some way, in the animal's behavior, in its energy, even physically. And this isn't something you're going to find just anywhere. This comes from observation, from living together, from truly paying attention. And when you understand this, you start to see the cat differently. You start to have more respect because you realize that it's not just there existing. It's acting, it's interfering, it's dealing with things you don't even notice. And this completely changes the relationship. Now let me ask you something. How many people do you know who have a cat and have never thought about this? Almost all of them, because they were taught wrong. They were taught that cats are distant. They were taught that cats don't get attached. They were taught that cats are independent, but they weren't taught what the cat actually does. And when you understand what the cat does, you start to realize its real value in your home. And more than that, you start to realize how much you were ignoring important things. And this changes your perception, changes your attention, even changes the way you behave in your environment, because you start to feel more, to observe more, to understand more. And then you realize something: the cat isn't there by chance. It never was. There was a moment when it became impossible to ignore all of this. And it wasn't inside the house, it was outside. I was going out, living my normal routine, not expecting anything. And I heard a sound, a meow, but it wasn't the usual meow. It wasn't a sound you could easily recognize. It was weak, muffled, as if it were trapped. And that caught my attention, because when you start to observe more, you begin to notice things that used to go unnoticed. And I went after that sound, not really knowing what I was going to find. When I got closer, I saw a discarded bag, closed, and the sound was coming from there. And at that moment, you already understand, even before opening it. And when I opened it, there was a kitten, too small, too fragile, in there with no chance at all, just waiting. And this isn't a pretty story, this is reality. And when you pick up an animal in that situation, you don't just feel pity, you feel shock, because at that moment, you see two things very clearly: the capacity for human cruelty and the incredible resilience of that animal, because even there, in that condition, it still had the strength to try to survive, to try to call someone, to not give up. And that leaves a mark. It leaves a mark in a way that doesn't go away easily. And it was there that my perspective changed for good. Because up until then, I was observing energy, I was noticing behavior, but at that moment it became clear that there was something more. It was as if each animal had a role, a function. And when you start paying attention to that, you start to see patterns as well. Cats don't just show up out of nowhere. They appear at specific moments, moments of change, moments of instability, moments when you are more vulnerable. And a lot of people ignore this. They say, "Oh, it just showed up." But it didn't just show up. It was drawn to you, and this isn't mystical in a fantastical sense. It's connection, it's being in tune. And when you start to notice this, you begin to see things differently. You start to have more respect because you understand that it's not just an animal living there, it's an active presence in your life. And when you ignore this, you lose an important part of what's happening around you. And the problem isn't not knowing, the problem is not wanting to see, because when you see, you understand. And when you understand, you change. There is something that has been repeated for a long time and that many people still believe. That cats bring bad luck, that black cats are negative, that cats are connected to bad things. And this is one of the biggest distortions that exist, because it didn't come from the truth. It came from fear and ignorance. And when people don't understand something, they attack it. It's always been like this. And this happened to cats for a very long time. They were associated with things that had no direct connection, and this led to consequences, but the reality is different. Cats do not bring bad energy. They react to what is already present in the environment. They act upon that. They interfere. And this bothers those who would rather not notice, because once you start to notice, you can no longer pretend it's not happening, and not everyone wants that. Not everyone wants to take responsibility for their own environment, because noticing requires change, requires attention, requires awareness, and the cat activates that. It stirs up the environment, it changes the pattern, it reacts to what is invisible to you. And when you start to observe this, you stop repeating what you've heard and begin to see for yourself. And that completely changes the way you see everything. After everything I've observed, everything I've experienced, everything I've realized over time, I've come to a simple conclusion. The cat is not there by chance. It never was. It's not just company, it's not just presence, it's action. It interferes with the environment, it reacts to what you can't see. It positions itself in front of things you ignore and does this all the time without needing to show off, without needing to draw attention, in a silent and constant way. And that changes everything, because when you understand this, you start to treat it differently, with more respect, with more attention, with more awareness. You start to notice more, you start to feel more, you start to understand the environment you live in, and that improves everything. Now let me ask you something. After all this, do you still see your cat the same way? Or has something changed inside you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you know someone who has a cat but has never stopped to notice any of this, send this video to them, because there are things happening in their house that they haven't realized yet. And the sooner they understand, the better.